Hi ladies, welcome back to the Perimenopause Manual YouTube channel. This is Dr. Alexandra Doig, and today we are talking all about burnout, how you get there, effectively the processes that happen to reach burnout, the effects of burnout, and this will be a stepping stone into then another information session or lecture about then how we get restoration from burnout. And that is really where everyone, I think, is at. We all need to either get into recovery to stop ourselves from reaching burnout, or if we're in burnout, we need to learn how to restore our health. Okay, so if we're talking about burnout, essentially, I'm going to draw a graph here with on our axis stress and time. And we all know that we all have a degree of stress in our life, and this is really the baseline stress in our life. Now, baseline stress can be just your day-to-day activities. It doesn't have to necessarily be bad stress. It can be things like getting up each morning with your alarm clock and going to work each day and just being professional. It can be caring for children. It can be providing for a family. It can be looking after a sick member of the family or an elderly member of the family. These are all day-to-day stresses, okay? Another very unrecognized stress that I really, really need to talk about, because it's so important in the restoration and recovery phase, is malnutrition. And you might go, but no, we don't have any malnutrition in the West, but in fact, we are the most malnutritioned we have ever been. Yes, we eat a lot of food and we're probably eating more than we've ever eaten. There's more obesity than there has ever been before, but we are malnutritioned. So we're just not getting nutrition from the food that we're putting into our bodies. And the body essentially works on building blocks, okay, for every protein that it makes, for every chemical substance that it then makes. And the way chemical processes happen in the body is that if you don't have the building blocks, then you can't make adequate substance here, which then can't then do its effect for the next step in a pathway. And this can really, really cause damage and slowing down of essential pathways. And these are things like feeling sluggish, having mental fogginess. All of this comes from, or even anxiety, all of this comes from not having adequate building blocks, which are vitamins, which are minerals, which are proteins, fats, carbohydrates, fatty acids, etc. All of those things are just so essential. Everything that your body needs is needed, and it's not just optional. And so when your body doesn't have those things, it sees it as stress, and it inputs the signal of stress. So as I said, malnutrition is a very unrecognized but very significant baseline stress that most Western bodies undergo unless they are consciously putting effort into giving their body nutrition. Okay, now up the top here we have basically the top of the burn of the dam, and it's burnout. Okay, now your baseline, there's usually a nice, a good distance between your baseline stress and burnout. If, however, you have additional stresses in your life, you might have a sickness, you might have an unwell child, you might have an accident or injury, you might have an elderly parent or friend that you are looking after who is sick, or you might have bereavement, grief, loss, separation, relationship breakdown, all of these things, or a bully at school or assessments, exam, they are going to increase your baseline, okay, which means that you don't have as much room to move before you hit burnout, the higher that baseline is. If then you have additional things like exams or a breakdown or even a move, okay, or you have a bully at work, or you have increased stresses. So for instance, I worked in during COVID, and there were so many more stresses. Every day at work was significantly more stressful during COVID than non-COVID times. And I know that might sound unbelievable, but we didn't have caregivers who were coming in. We had to wear PPE, and that just meant dehydration because you were sweating all the time. You felt too unclean to sort of eat and drink during the day. And so intake was definitely a lot less. You also had a degree of illness that was higher. I was studying during that time, so definitely I had, elevated stress during COVID as a health professional, working on the front line. Now, eventually, if you hit the point of burnout, now the thing that really pushed me over was an illness in the family, a significant illness in the family in one of my children, and the process of, especially I think as a doctor, but I think this is consistent with any family who goes through a significant health crisis or bereavement or injury, etc. It is a hugely stressful time, and on top of work at the back end of COVID, I moved into general practice as my hope for recovery from COVID. And then I was sort of hit with this health crisis and all of the travel that was involved in that, the stress that was involved with that. And I hit burnout, and it was a very crazy experience. My ability to just mentally process, my alertness, my fatigue levels just shot through the roof, and the weight gain happened, facial pigmentation happened, etc. And it was something that I felt completely out of control with and helpless to do anything about. So it was all of that really prompted my really intense research into burnout, what causes it, how to recover from it, and I just want to share it with you because there is nothing better than recovering from burnout, okay? So this is the burnout graph. We don't want you to get here, but if you are there, I'd like to teach you how to recover. Ideally, if you're recognizing that you're getting close to burnout, it's time to take a break. It's time to implement the restorative tools that I will give you so that you can go back down to a baseline, even bring your baseline down lower. So that is the aim of this whole education series. It'll be a several part series because there's a lot of information to give you. Now, if we're looking at burnout in more of a physiological sense, an anatomical sense, the center or the area that really is involved is deep in the brain. So this is a very sketchy, bad sketch of the brain. But right deep into the brain, there's an area of the brain called the hypothalamus. Now, this is a really interesting part of the body in that it's both a nerve and a gland. Now, the cool thing about that is that it receives both input from hormones that travel in the bloodstream, but it also receives input through the nervous system. So it's going to receive input from every part of the body, every sense, every input. So injury, stress, fear, emotions are going to give input to the hypothalamus, and all of those things do give input to the hypothalamus. So it is both nerve and gland. Now it is attached to a gland called the pituitary gland. Now the pituitary gland essentially is directly behind your eyes, sort of deep into the skull, and it produces hormones when the hypothalamus produces hormones that stimulate it, okay? Now, we're focusing initially on one hormone axis, and that is the stress hormone axis, or the cortisol axis. Now the hypothalamus, as I said, will have some sort of stress, give it a message, whatever that stress can be. It can be malnutrition, it can be emotions, it can be, as I said, it can be senses as well. You've got a whole variety of things. Any cause of stress will tell the hypothalamus to produce corticotropin releasing hormone, which then tells the pituitary gland to produce ACTH or adrenocorticotropic hormone. This then travels in the bloodstream and gets to the adrenal gland, which is just sits on top of the kidney, and tells the adrenal gland to finally produce cortisol. Okay. Now, if you've ever had a blood test done, maybe for lightheadedness or because you've had excessive weight gain, you're feeling tired, etc., you may, or blood pressure even, you may have noticed ACTH or cortisol were being tested, or you've had a suppression test or something like that. So you might already be familiar with some of these abbreviations, okay, and some of these hormones. Now, the important thing is all hormone axes have a feedback system. So when cortisol is produced, it goes back to both the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and it has negative or inhibitory feedback and tells them, we don't need any more, you can stop producing it, okay? The stimulus is gone, stop producing it. Or we don't need any more, okay? Now, unfortunately, when stress just continues and continues and continues without letting off or letting up, we end up with such high input from stress plus from cortisol that the whole thing just becomes dysregulated. And you end up with hypothalamic dysregulation or hypothalamic burnout. And that is at a point where then we are just getting increased production of cortisol. Now, cortisol is actually a really great hormone. When the axis is functioning normally, cortisol is there for your fight and flight response. It enhances your emotional thinking during your fight and flight response. It makes sure that non-essential processes and functions in your body during a fight and flight response are either stopped or dampened. It monitors your immune response to make sure that it's not excessive. And they're just a few things that cortisol does. So it's a really important hormone when it's working properly. When you have excessive cortisol, this is where problems start happening, where you start becoming immunosuppressed because cortisol does suppress your immune system and your immune response. You'll find that people who are asthmatic, they're on steroid inhalers to dampen immune response to allergic stimuli for their asthma. People who have allergic skin rashes, they will often be on a steroid cream and things like that. So steroid, if you have constant steroid, you'll end up being immunosuppressed, which means you're more likely to contract illnesses, okay? High steroid can also cause increased acid production in your stomach and, ultimately gastritis, stomach ulcers. That's from a study that was done on rats years ago. It was, crazy to read the results of that study and how extreme stress very quickly led to stomach ulcers and death in those rats. High cortisol is also going to lead, and hormonal dysregulation is also going to lead to metabolic abnormalities, weight gain, abnormal distribution of fat, fluid buildup and retention, hair loss, skin thinning and weakening. So yes, high cortisol definitely is very damaging to the body. Okay, so that is the stress hormone axis, and that is the explanation of how burnout and hypothalamic dysregulation and burnout happens. Now, why is understanding this important? Well, essentially, the hypothalamus isn't just responsible for producing the hormones in the the stress hormone axis, it's actually responsible for producing a whole heap of other hormones. So I'm going to just show you an image of a very basic image, if this will allow me. Yeah, here we go. That the hypothalamus produces. So if you look here in the top line, that's what the hypothalamus produces, okay? And we've got in the center, we've got CRH, and I'll go through each of them. And you can see that ACTH and then adrenal cortex produces cortisol. If we look on the left, we've got dopamine to produce prolactin from the pituitary gland. And then that's the hormone then that stimulates the mammary glands for lactation. We've got the thyroid hormone axis. We have, oops, where did that go? Oops. We have the thyroid hormone axis going back up. Sorry about that. Oh goodness. Okay, here we go. We've got the growth hormone axis producing insulin-like growth factors, and they are responsible for cell differentiation, cell proliferation, your bones and your muscle tissue health, okay? We've got your gonadotropin releasing hormones and all your sex hormones, and you can imagine that if you get hypothalamic burnout and it affects all of these hormone axes, that you are going to be in absolute dysregulation in your body. And that is exactly what happens. This is pretty much perimenopause in a nutshell. And I think we will come to recognize that perimenopause is basically evidence of hypothalamic dysregulation. So the good news is if it is effectively a disease or a byproduct of hypothalamic dysregulation, then we should be able to reduce or delay or put it off or restore ourselves till we reach menopause, have a much easier transition through menopause into the postmenopausal state, and definitely not experience during perimenopause itself. So as I mentioned, this is just the first part in a series of, I guess, lectures around burnout restoration, and then, I guess, management of perimenopause. This is the nitty-gritty of it. So I hope you have understood the concepts that I've introduced today, because they're the stepping stone to further information, and we'll start working on that baseline stress through giving yourselves really good, hearty, nutritious meals. I've got more meals coming, delicious meals that your family will love, that are great and high in nutrition. And work on sleep restoration. Sleep is when growth hormone peaks in its production, and it is a restorative hormone. So I talked about melatonin, and you will potentially, trial that to help with sleep improvement, or you may trial meditation, stretching, etc. before sleep. But definitely sleep is a really important part of recovery and restoration. Nutrition, and I guess all the other things are, sometimes you have to make big decisions if you want big improvements. So good luck with everything, and I'm looking forward to giving you way more important information in our next sessions in the workshop. That's it for today, but we'll see you later, hey.